Envelope was still sitting on the table when my mother laughed. I sold the voucher, she said, stirring sugar into her tea as if she were commenting on the weather, as if we'd ever go with you. My sister barely looked up from her phone. Thanks for the extra cash, she said with a grin. No one reached for the envelope again. The room smelled of fried onions and fresh bread, and somewhere outside a dog barked twice before everything went strangely quiet. I picked up my keys instead. No one asked where I was going. The resort had taken me nearly a year to afford. Not because it was the most expensive place I could find, but because I wanted something that couldn't be folded into another practical decision. 50 years of marriage deserved more than another kitchen appliance or a framed photograph. I imagined them sitting on a balcony above the sea, arguing over breakfast the way they always had, only softer. The voucher came in a heavy cream envelope tied with a dark blue ribbon. I'd kept the ribbon after giving it to them. It stayed wrapped around my wrist for days before I slipped it into my jacket pocket. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because it was the only part of the gift nobody could sell. My parents weren't cruel people. They were practical enough to sell birthday presents they didn't need, practical enough to remind me that family helps family whenever I paid a bill or fixed something around the house, practical enough to assume I'd understand. What they never understood was that practicality can slowly erase tenderness until nobody notices it's gone. I rented a small apartment across town 3 days later. It wasn't an impulsive decision. I'd been collecting documents for months, waiting for a reason that felt honest instead of angry. The apartment overlooked a railway line. Every evening the windows trembled as freight trains rolled past, and oddly, I found the sound comforting. Things were moving. Even when I wasn't, the blue ribbon stayed inside my desk drawer. The phone hardly rang that first week. I think they assumed I'd cool off. I almost did. Then I remembered my mother's smile when she said, as if we'd ever go with you. It wasn't the sale. It was the certainty that my company held less value than the money. A week later, I changed the emergency contacts at work. Then I canceled the automatic transfers that quietly covered half my parents' utility bills every month. I redirected the savings into an account marked simply Future. No speeches, no announcements, just paperwork. Funny how life changes because of signatures nobody else sees. 5 days after that, someone knocked on my apartment door. My father stood there first, shoulders lower than I had ever seen them. My mother lingered behind him, clutching her handbag with both hands. Neither of them looked angry. They looked frightened. We've been trying to call, my father said. I know. You changed your number. I did. My mother finally spoke. We need to talk. The resort had contacted them. The vouchers they'd sold had been reported for unauthorized transfer because it was issued as a non-resaleable anniversary package. The buyer demanded their money back after the reservation was canceled. There were arguments, threats of legal action, but that wasn't why they had come. My father kept rubbing his wedding ring. He didn't know you'd. He stopped. Move? I finished. He nodded. My mother looked around my apartment as though she'd walked into a stranger's home. When were you going to tell us? I almost smiled. When were you going to tell me you sold the gift? Silence settled between us. Not heavy, just honest. My mother sat down without asking. I thought you'd be disappointed, she admitted. I didn't think you'd disappear. Disappear, such a strange word. I'd answered every call for years. I'd repaired leaking pipes, driven them to appointments, missed holidays with friends because something always needed fixing. Yet moving 20 minutes away was disappearing. I looked toward the window. A train rolled past, rattling the glass. I didn't disappear, I said quietly. I stopped waiting to be invited. She lowered her eyes. For the first time in my life, she didn't have a quick answer. My father reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the coffee table, the blue ribbon. He'd found it in my old room after I'd left. I figured, he began, then stopped again. His hands trembled slightly. I figured it mattered. I stared at the ribbon for a long time. It suddenly looked less like wrapping and more like the last thread connecting two versions of my life. The buyer eventually recovered the money through the proper channels. My parents paid back what they had received. The practical decision ended up costing more than it earned. Life has a quiet way of balancing careless choices. Months later, we still spoke, not every day, not every week. Birthdays, some Sundays, occasional dinners where nobody pretended the past had never happened. Something had changed permanently. Expectations had become invitations. Obligations had become requests. Sometimes I accepted, sometimes I didn't. No one argued anymore. Last spring, I took a short trip by myself, nothing extravagant. Just a small hotel overlooking a windy coastline. At sunrise, I stood on the balcony with a cup of coffee, the blue ribbon tucked inside my wallet. The sea didn't care who had disappointed whom. The waves arrived anyway. For the first time in years, I realized peace wasn't something my family could give me or take away. It was something I had quietly carried out the front door the night nobody noticed I was leaving.